unable to bring himself to kill another ape that day, let alone a baby, he gives it to Will to do as he wishes. Even at just a day old, Caesar already showed incredible intelligence, prompting Will to keep him continuing his work on the ALZ-112 at home. Yep, that's right, he was working from home way before a worldwide pandemic made it cool. By 18 months old, Caesar could sign up to 24 words. By 2, he completed puzzles designed for kids aged 8 and above, and by 3, he continued to show cognitive skills that far exceeded that of a human counterpart. The reason for this was because the ALZ-112 drug had been passed on genetically from his mother, and due to there being no brain cells that needed replacing, which is how the drug usually works, replacing brain cell damaged by Alzheimer's, Caesar's brain was radically boosted. Seeing this success, along with his father's deteriorating health due to Alzheimer's, Will steals some of the ALZ-112 drug from his lab and uses it on his dad, who becomes the first human test for the cure, and the effects are perfect, with Will, his father, and Caesar then growing close over the years as a family. During this time, they take Caesar to the Redwoods, which becomes his second home. For now. During these 5 years of bonding, Caesar had seemingly mastered sign language and understood human speech, with his IQ doubling in just a single year alone. This came at a cost, however. Caesar began to undergo an identity crisis. He felt he didn't belong and wondered if he was nothing more than a pet. A reference to the original films where the space virus wiped out all human pets, pushing them to use the apes as such instead. To give Caesar clarity on who and what he was, Will took him to the Genesis labs and explained how he became so smart, as well as the fate of his mother. Things only got worse from here though, as in the 5 years since taking the ALZ-112 cure, Will's dad begins to develop antibodies, causing his Alzheimer's to return with a vengeance. As a result of this, he gets into his neighbour's car, believing it to be his own, crashing it. Understandably, the neighbour gets pretty pissed off and lashes out at Will's father, which is when Caesar steps in to defend him. Seeing the violent attack, the humans look at the chimp in fear as animal security ultimately takes Caesar to what is nothing more than an ape prison. He was set to stay there until Will could settle up in court. In the meantime though, he got to work on the ALZ-113, a more powerful version of the drug, in hope that it would be more effective on the antibodies the human body developed in response to the 112. After Mr. Jacobs heard the positive side effects the 112 had for those 5 years on Will's dad, he couldn't wait to get started on the upgrade, thinking of nothing more than profits, completely disregarding the side effects it could have. Side effects that would end the human race as we know it. The ape chosen to become the guinea pig for this new drug was none other than Cobra. During the tests, however, Franklin was exposed to the airborne 113 drug, ultimately becoming the first human to be infected with the simian flu, aka Patient Zero. It was the moment humanity's fate had been set in stone forever. Elsewhere, Caesar struggled to be accepted by the other apes due to his human clothing and demeanor, and was bullied by Rocket. However, he made friends with an orangutan called Maurice, as he knew sign language from his time in the circus. One day, one of the workers at the prison, who will be known from here on out as Draco Malfoy, enjoyed physically harming and torturing the apes, thus brought his friends to see them, because if there's any way to get pussy, it's definitely to show that you force animals into horrible living conditions. Duh.
Me personally, I wouldn't take this level of
Nonetheless, Caesar managed to lure one of Malfoy's friends to him, stealing a pocket knife. He then used it to pick the lock of his cage, as well as the cage of Buck the gorilla, ultimately becoming the alpha ape, leading the rest much like his father used to. Back at Will's home, his dad dies before the ALZ-113 drug is ready. Whilst clearing out his things from the house, a news report can be heard talking about the trip to Mars on the Icarus ship, another nod to the original films. Tests continue to be done on Cobra with the ALZ-113, despite the proper procedures not being taken beforehand, causing Will to quit his job after seeing Mr. Jacobs let greed get the best of them and their cure for Alzheimer's. Franklin, who had been forced into time off work due to his rapidly growing illness, goes to Will's house for advice on the matter, but ultimately sneezes at his neighbour, covering him in specks of simian flu-infected blood. There was no sign of Will at home, however, as he tried to buy back Caesar's freedom, but the ape ultimately rejects his former parent after seeing him carrying a leash in his hands. Caesar no longer desired life as a pet, but rather as a leader amongst his people, which is why he frees the apes from their cages later that day, bringing them all onto his side. When Maurice asks why Caesar even helped free Rocket, he tells him it's because apes alone weak, apes together strong. A motto that would eventually be passed down amongst apes for hundreds of years. Later that night, Caesar escapes the prison altogether, but unlike his mother, who didn't understand the world she'd been thrown into, Caesar was smart enough to navigate himself back home to steal the ALZ-113 drug to use on the other apes as part one of their uprising. Meanwhile, 8 months after its launch, the Icarus ship enters Mars's atmosphere before vanishing entirely through a wormhole, whilst back on Earth, Franklin is found dead. The balance of the world had already begun to shift, as seen when Caesar started to teach his newly intelligent players sign language. When the time comes for them to return to their cages, Caesar refuses. In an attempt to force him in, Draco Malfoy tries using a taser, but is ultimately knocked out by Caesar, which is when, for the first time in history, an ape speaks. The apes escape and their rise began. They storm the Genesis building, freeing the other apes, including Cobra. As Jacobs is informed of the fatal side effects from the ALZ-113, he's ambushed by Caesar's army. He escapes by helicopter, which is when the apes make their way towards the Redwoods, freeing those trapped in the local city in the process, whilst also forging weapons. It culminates in a standoff on the Golden Gate Bridge. Caesar forbade his army from being used who hadn't fought hard to path, but a chief is ultimately shot to its death during the battle. Will, knowing that Caesar would be heading for the Redwoods, makes contact with him, but before the two can talk things out, Mr. Jacobs' chopper opens fire. Buck saves Caesar's life and proceeds to sacrifice his own chopper, barely hanging on. Jacobs begs for his life in front of Caesar, who lets Cobra land a victory blow, symbolizing the ape's success in the battle on the Golden Gate Bridge, which lasted for 6 hours. There was one final thing Caesar had to deal with, however. Will, Cobra ambushes him towards, forcing Caesar to step in, which is when he begins to realize that his leader may have had a soft spot for the human race. Nonetheless, despite pleading Caesar to stop and return home, the ape whispers in his ear, Caesar is on. With Will saying his final goodbyes, the apes then make the Redwoods their territory. This was really the beginning though, as the simian flu soon went viral after Will's neighbor went to work as a pilot, causing the infection to spread on a global scale. It was deemed a Category 5 pandemic, making it the worst case scenario. The government tried to keep it under lock and key, but it was no use. The fatality total of the simian flu is expected to rise to anywhere between 5 and 150 million in just 6 to 8 months, with a survival rate of 1 in 500. Some humans are fortunate enough to be immune to the simian flu. However, as you'll soon see, that simply led them to a fate possibly even worse than death. Riots broke out across the city, with martial law declared in 28 nations, including the US and Canada. Nuclear reactors began melting down, resulting in a loss of power across the country, with generators running out. By now, all regular government functions had been suspended indefinitely. Meanwhile, a cure was being worked on by the CDC, however progress was slow. They needed patients to test on to stand a fighting chance. Thus, the CDC spread rumors of a cure available in Austin to lure unsuspecting people in, whereas what really awaited them was in prison. The CDC was trafficking people to turn into guinea pigs for the cure, paralleling how humanity traffics apes to create the disease in the first place. During this time of uncertainty, a group called the Exercitus Viri rose up, a group of violent conspiracists who believed it was the apes who passed on the virus to humans, even though the truth of the matter was that it was a man-made pandemic. Because of this though, they fought what they believed to be a holy battle to save mankind. They tried to take over the world by making all apes go extinct, as well as any humans loyal to them working on cures, as they refused any cure that originated from the same species that caused the pandemic in the first place. Other countries across the globe began shutting their borders, dealing with the sick in their own way. Ghana worked side by side with apes to try and find a cure. In Malaysia, orangutans and humans also lived in harmony. However, the Exercitus Viri took over the World Health Organization in Switzerland, while in France, a a circus gorilla named Pug, blessed with immense intelligence, has his own hand to battle against them, much like Caesar. Over the next 2 years, Caesar and another ape called Cornelia, who had their baby, the Valiant, Rocket and Tinker also had a baby who they named Ash. This pushes Caesar to seek out a better world for the apes, despite Maurice explaining that they are safe, happy and content with where they are. Caesar, however, strives for a world that will care for beyond just them, rather a world for the future generations, with his decisions being the foundations of it. On the other hand, humanity struggled to keep what they'd been left with, desperately hoping to survive long enough to even see another generation. In spite of this, both humans and apes were worried that one wrong move would cause everything they'd been working towards to collapse. An example of this was how the apes weren't all hunky-dory amongst each other. An ape called Pope was exposed to the militarized ALZ-113, aimed to overthrow Caesar's rule by assembling an army of so-called dumb apes, aka ones from the zoo that hadn't been exposed to the intelligence-enhancing drug. This is because Pope believes that the safest world for apes is one without humans altogether, whilst Caesar thinks ape and human should work side by side. But because Pope enslaves his own kind, Culver labels him no different than the humans, killing him to put an end to Pope's treason. Thus, rules were put into place to stop such a thing happening again. Ape, not kill ape. Little did Culver realise, however, that Pope was really a mirror that would soon develop. 8 years later, Caesar's son had blue eyes and actually grown up, whilst Maurice led a school for the younger generation, teaching them language and morals to follow in Caesar's beliefs. Not too long after, Caesar's second son, Cornelius, was born. This causes Caesar to reminisce about his human connections, such as Will, who had since died. He's not the only one, though. As Maurice mentioned, it had been 10 winters since the simian flu spread, with no sign of a human for the past 3, making them believe they had gone extinct. Which, with perfect timing, is Blue Eyes and Ash just so happened to bump into one then and there. This is Carver, and all you need to know is that he is a dickhead. He shoots Ash in a panic, calling for backup from other humans, whilst the apes rush to the sound of the gunshots. Here they show how much they've continued to evolve over the years, as now many of them people ordering the humans to go. Culver, however, is instructed to follow them by Caesar to learn where the humans are living, revealing that a colony of the hundreds have been surviving in a tower inside San Francisco. Seeing this, Culver reports back to Caesar, telling him that they must attack now, trying to get other apes to follow him. But Caesar immediately shuts this idea down, as going to war would risk losing everything they have worked so hard to create. Realizing the error in his ways, Culver apologizes, but reminds Caesar what the humans are capable of, pointing at the many stars he has amassed over the years thanks to them. Nonetheless, Caesar attempts to seek peace, with them visiting the colony the following day to outline what is human territory and what is apes. If either cross it, they will fight back. This results in mass panic among humans. However, Dreyfus calms them down, explaining that they will not hesitate to kill every last ape they have to. This is because they have no choice but to step foot in ape territory in order to reach the gap. They only have enough electricity to last them a short while, and if they can't get that dam running to reroute the power, they have no hope of survival. This is decided that Malcolm will meet with Caesar, and after 3 days he doesn't return, Dreyfus will lead them to the battle. Thankfully, their meeting is a success, with Caesar agreeing to help, as he believes that if they don't, the only other choice is all-out war, resulting in the death of many apes. The only rule being no human weapons. The following day at the dam, Malcolm explains how it works, how the electricity functions, only to be met with the face of an ape who really wants to say, Whilst this is happening though, an angered Cobra heads for the human city to scout them out. It's here he discovers their armory, filled to the brim with enough weapons to kill every last ape. He's found but decides to play dumb, using his time spent with humans where he was viewed as a form of entertainment to fool them. It took every ounce of his willpower to hide his hatred, but he succeeded. For now. Back with the group at the dam, the humans and apes begin to bond over Caesar's baby son. Things take a drastic turn for the worse, however, when baby Cornelius finds a gun Carver had hidden away, breaking the agreement they had made with Caesar. Angered, Malcolm and the humans are ordered to return home immediately decided and that their deal was now over. Caesar soon gives them one last chance though, after Ellie, Malcolm's girlfriend, helps treat Cornelia, who is ill with antibiotics. And so this act of kindness earned them 1 day's worth of time to get the dam up and running, with Caesar agreeing to help. However, with all trust gone, Carver was told he must stay in the car alone. At this point, Koba had hit a turning point. He saw what the humans had available to them and believed that Caesar loved humans more than apes, even more than his own family, which Koba used to persuade Blue Eyes to rebel against his father's beliefs. Such treacherous words caused Caesar to snap. He attacked Koba but stopped himself from killing him at the final moment after remembering his own message: ape not kill ape. Seeing this, a disconnect begins amongst them, with some siding with Koba, who was no longer trusted as Caesar's right-hand man. Thus, he passed on the responsibility of protecting his father from humans to Blue Eyes. Meanwhile, Koba returned to the human armory, once again playing dumb, but this time, his hatred had finally consumed him, as he killed the two humans and took their guns before heading back home, killing Carver on the way. It turned out that Koba had plans to keep the top. He conspired with his own loyal followers to set the treehouse on fire, whilst Koba secretly shot Caesar, hoping to kill him. By doing this, Koba would use the gun he stole as evidence that it was the humans who had shot their king, sparking a violent uprising amongst the apes. This was the exact moment Koba had ironically become his own worst nightmare. He had become the very thing he killed Hope for. He had become human. Back in the city, after Malcolm's Street managed to get the power back on, they partied, unbeknownst that Koba's army was heading straight for them with only one thing on their mind: war. First, they raided the armory, and then battle commenced between human and ape in San Francisco for the first time in 10 years. It's a battle that claimed the lives of many, human and ape alike. The war took them into the deep of the night, but the following morning, the fire comes to a close back at the ape treehouse, which is when Malcolm and Ellie find Caesar's body barely alive. Thus, they begin
two of them. Why weren't you going?
If Caesar returns from the dead, it could discourage the apes from following Koba. This is because many still believed in Caesar, Ash being one, who was ordered to kill a man in front of Koba to prove his loyalty. Once he refuses, he's dragged away before being thrown off a balcony by Koba, killing him, all to set an example and lead through fear. Before they could present Caesar to the apes, though, they needed a pit stop in a very special place, also that they could perform surgery. That place being none other than Will's old home. In order to perform the surgery, though, they needed equipment they didn't have. Thus, Malcolm had to sneak back to the human city undetected. At this point, Koba had begun imprisoning humans and even other apes, such as Maurice, who stayed loyal to Caesar. Malcolm was moments away from succeeding before being spotted by an ape. Fortunately for him, this ape was Blue Eyes. The once Koba fanboy had since realised the evil that he was after seeing his best friend be killed. Malcolm explains that his father is still alive, and so Blue Eyes helps him escape. Heading back to Caesar to perform the life-saving treatment required, rebuilding the trust between ape and humans. This marks a monumental moment in the war, as Blue Eyes informs the Caesar loyalists about his return. Thus, they begin their fight back that night by breaking free from their prison. Meanwhile, Caesar headed upstairs to reminisce about his childhood, remembering what a simpler world it was for him, a time where everything felt so easy. 2 days had now passed since Blue Eyes kicked off the fight back against Koba, as Malcolm led the apes to the human city through the subway system to remain undetected. Their journey was cut short though, as Dreyfus appeared. Whilst Caesar and the apes managed to escape unnoticed, Malcolm now had to deal with a bigger problem. The tower that the apes had taken over had since been laced with C4, with Dreyfus planning to kill them all at once. This included Caesar. What's more is that they had made contact with a military base up north who had dispatched a unit to help in the battle against the apes. At the top of the tower, Caesar made his return, resulting in an epic battle between him and Koba over who was fit to lead the apes into the future. Likewise, Malcolm had turned his gun on Dreyfus and the humans, demanding they give Caesar a chance. It's at this moment the parallels between Malcolm, Dreyfus, Caesar and Koba come full circle. Much like how Koba believed Caesar had chosen humans over ape, Dreyfus thinks Malcolm has done the reverse. Koba resorts to violence in order to save the apes, much like how Dreyfus resorts to detonating the C4 to save the humans, whilst Malcolm and Caesar are searching for a world in which both can live side by side. Nonetheless, as Cobra arises from the rubble of the tower, he truly abandons his life as an ape as he pulls a gun from the rubble rather than helping a struggling, dying comrade, only to start shooting at others. And so it leaves Caesar no choice. He jumps in to put an end to Cobra's uprising once and for all, as Cobra desperately holds on, begging for help, reminding his former king of the rule, ape, not to kill ape. Caesar declares that it no longer applies to Cobra, as he is no ape. Thus, he's left to fall to his death, much like how Cobra left Dr. Jacobs to suffer the same fate. Whilst this war had come to an end, it was merely the beginning of one much greater. Knowing that this was the ape's fault, Caesar tells Malcolm to run whilst he can before the military arrive, which is where Caesar is accepted back as the ape king, taking them into the next step of their evolution. They wouldn't get long to rest though, as the war with the humans continued across San Francisco. Thus, Caesar had to swallow his pride and come to terms with the fact that there was no going back now. He had to abandon his rule of not killing humans, or else the apes would be wiped out. The world had truly entered an era of relentless war. It wasn't just between the apes and humans though. Those who remained loyal to Cobra after his death abandoned Caesar's clan and any subsequent loyalties to him, to the point where even Caesar himself admitted that they may be even more dangerous than the humans. Talking of which, they had resorted to fighting amongst themselves too, continuing the paralleling journey that these two species had been on. However, by now, it was estimated that 90% of the human race had been wiped out. Meanwhile, the military unit from up north, made up of whatever remained of the US Army, finally arrived in San Francisco, led by Colonel McCullough, who had hunted down the apes in search of Caesar. Knowing this, the Ape King accepted it was time to abandon their home, and so he put the responsibility on his son, Blue Eyes, as well as Rocket, to find somewhere new and safe. This mission was to not only begin Blue Eyes' training as a leader one day, but so that he could also embark on a journey of self-discovery to stop him from following in Cobra's footsteps. But in actuality, Caesar should have been the one stopping himself from doing the same. Meanwhile, research facilities in Atlanta and Portland continued working on a cure for the simian flu, which had begun to mutate. Much like how the ALZ-112 mutated to fight back the human antibodies, the ALZ-113 had started to do the same. Over the subsequent 3 years, the human race rapidly began to deteriorate. Ape test subjects became few and far between for research on a cure, as the simian flu continued to now target a human host's brain, decimating the entire cerebral cortex, essentially stripping humanity of what truly made them human in the first place: intelligence. With the first victim being Dr. Serling. One man who had clearly been affected by this was Colonel McCullough, as he was a total fucking idiot, slaughtering all apes and staff alike at the Portland research facility working on a cure, burning the building to the ground. This was the start of his terror organization, Alpha Omega, a group that believed the simian flu was a blessing to the planet, cleansing it of the impure. Elsewhere at a zoo/farm, more humans began to engage in battle between each other, resorting to murder in order to claim the resources they needed to survive. The only survivor of this farm ended up being Bad Ape. He would often help out on the farm as much as he could, but would constantly be blamed for any wrongdoing that happened, resulting in him believing the Bad Ape was his true name due to the amount of times he'd been called it. With Caesar's clan still being hunted, he came up with the idea to hurt the humans, take away their power. Thus, he aimed to destroy the dam which he helped Malcolm fix, which ultimately cost him everything he had worked for. He trained his apes for battle, but realized that they were not ready for all-out war. They wouldn't have long though, as Colonel McCullough's Alpha Omega had begun setting up his unit of donkeys, aka apes that had defected against Caesar and had been captured. One of these Cobra loyalists was Red, who out of spite for Caesar gave up his location and led the colonel to him. The battle upon the dam commenced, with Caesar's clan succeeding with their mission of destroying it before fleeing to their command base. At this point, 15 years had passed since the outbreak of the simian flu, the last 2 of which Caesar spent in hiding, leading the war effort against Alpha Omega. He'd soon be forced to make an appearance though, after an ape base came under attack. 63 apes lost their lives in the battle, and those of Alpha Omega that did survive were captured. This included Red. However, Caesar stuck to his morals and released the humans back to Colonel McCullough to try and find a peaceful resolution. Red, on the other hand, escaped. The ape tasked with watching him was Winter, who only managed to escape with his life by agreeing to leave the location of Caesar's secret base. Things began to look up for the apes, however, as Rocket and Blue Eyes finally returned from their journey with good news that a new, safe place to call home had been found, beyond the mountains and woods, desert, free from humans. All they needed was a safe, secure passage that would allow the entire clan to escape the woods unnoticed. This moment of happiness, however, would not last long, not even a single day, as that night Winter made his escape, knowing that the effects of his betrayal were about to take place. Alpha Omega, led by Colonel McCullough himself, had infiltrated Caesar's base, killing both his wife and son Blue Eyes, thinking it was him. Overcome with anger, Caesar tries to chase the Colonel down, but it's no use. It was an event that would change the outcome of Caesar's life forever. The following morning, he sends the clan off towards their new home, whilst he heads off to find the Colonel. This way, he could get revenge and also distract the humans long enough to allow the other apes to find freedom. Maurice, Luca, and Rocket, however, wouldn't allow their leader to take such a dangerous path alone, especially Rocket, who knew how it felt to lose a son. Thus, they arrived at an old Alpha Omega campsite and raided for supplies. What they didn't expect to bump into here, however, was a young girl named Nova, an innocent child affected by the new strain of the simian flu. She wanted to talk, but her brain simply no longer had the capability to do so. After Caesar killed her father, though, he reluctantly agreed to Maurice's wish to bring her along with them. That is when they successfully stumbled upon an operating Alpha Omega base, the one in which Winter was working at as a newly induced donkey. The apes quietly infiltrated and asked Winter for any information they had on the Colonel, who had since left for another camp towards the border before they arrived. It's also here that Winter admits to leaking Caesar's information. Realizing he was the one responsible for the death of his family, Caesar is once again overcome with hatred to the point where he kills Winter, a moment which symbolized the ape Caesar was becoming. He had broken his rule. He had become Cobra. Because of this, Cobra haunted Caesar in his dreams, but it's cut short. As Alpha Omega set off to link up with Colonel McCullough at the border, he was there waiting for the military. But the apes follow on their journey but lose track of them after hearing gunshots in the distance. Much to their surprise, the humans weren't shooting at them, but rather at each other. They were executing those that had fallen victim to the simian flu. Before they could locate where Alpha Omega had gone, though, one of the apes' horses had been stolen. They chased the culprit to an abandoned ski resort, which is when they learned that it was another intelligent ape like them that had been surviving here alone. It was Bad Ape. That night, they share stories of where they've come from and what they're doing, with Bad Ape explaining he knew where the border they were looking for is. It was a prison for the apes, where they were being physically tortured into performing slave labor for the Colonel. However, when Bad Ape got the assurance that Caesar would help free the apes there, he agrees to take them. The next morning, they arrive, but are ambushed by a couple of soldiers. Whilst they succeed at killing them, it comes at a great cost. Luca, the gorilla, had been fatally wounded. Realizing the journey he had brought his friends on as he watches them mourn, Caesar sends them home, declaring that this is a mission he should have done alone. But before Caesar could even mourn for Luca, he was met with the strung-up corpses of even more of his clan. The apes that were imprisoned here were his apes. They had been ambushed on their journey to their new home. Some were killed as an example, the rest was they slaved away building a wall. This wall was to keep the military unit Colonel McCullough was meeting with out, as they were actually coming to fight Alpha Omega for forcing their own form of justice onto the world by killing those infected with the simian flu as part of what they believed to be a holy war, much like the Exercitus Viri before them. Caesar is then forced to join the slave labor, where he regrets his actions for allowing people to consume the dangers it put everyone through. Thus, Caesar stands tall and orders Red to stop when he sees him whipping an older ape struggling to build a wall because of the food and water they've been given. Witnessing their great leader fight back, the other apes begin to protest. However, it all comes to a swift stop when the Colonel shoots the elderly ape before threatening to turn his gun into Caesar next. To set an example to the other apes, Colonel McCullough strung Caesar up to a post and left him there before being taken into sport that evening. He explains to Caesar the hardships the human race had been through ever since the creation of the ALZ-112, and that Mother Nature was now getting her payback after the human race dared to defy her. Thus, the upcoming battle with the military would go down as the most important battle in human history, as if the Colonel loses, it would result in a world where humanity was destined to be nothing but cattle. Meanwhile, Rocket, Maurice, Bad Ape and Nova watched from the hills, planning for their great ape escape. Okay, that was bad. I'm sorry. Nonetheless, they stumble upon something promising. An underground passage used by the sick to escape from Alpha Omega, which the apes could now use to their advantage. The next day, Caesar wakes up to the sight of his clan getting the food and water they deserve after he worked hard to persuade the Colonel. It wasn't going so well for him though. Cobra still haunted him in his sleep, reminding him of what he had become, whilst he was left alone in the freezing cold of the night, told that if he survives, Caesar can either go back to work or be shot. That same night though, he's given a sense of relief as Nova walks up to his cage, giving him her toy, food and water. However, Rocket falls victim to the slave camp as he's forced into using himself as a distraction for Nova to escape. Still alive the next morning thanks to her, Caesar is forced to the quarry alone to work. But that's not all. The Colonel finds Nova's toy in the cage, subsequently sealing his fate. With the apes now reinvigorated, they begin planning for their escape, counting the amount of steps there is between the adult and child prison so that Maurice and Bad Ape could dig holes for them underground to escape through. However, the route to the children's cage is blocked off by a flood, forcing the apes into finding a new escape route and fast. How? Well, throw shit at the guard, of course. This pisses him off, which the apes take advantage of as he enters the pen looking for the culprit to torture, only to be pulled through the hole they made and stripped of his weapon and keys. Thus, the apes can begin freeing the children, transferring them to the adult cage and underground. With the escape seemingly complete, Caesar once again makes the decision to stay behind and end things. He admits that there's no going back for him now. Anger had consumed him entirely. During the night of the escape, however, the military arrived, marking the beginning of the end for the human race. Despite this, the Colonel was nowhere to be seen. As Caesar went to his headquarters expecting to kill him, what he found was no longer Colonel McCullough. The simian flu he caught from Nova's toy ravaged his body and had already begun eating away at his brain. He had become what he hated. He had lost. Caesar couldn't bring himself to kill him, but he didn't have to. The Colonel pulled the gun on himself, ending it all, symbolizing humanity's end as he knew it. All that was left was for Caesar to escape and join up with his clan, but if only it were that easy. He's shot by one of the very soldiers he let live as a sign of peace. Seeing the length Caesar was going through to save his species opened Red's eyes, who realized why he became loyal to him in the first place. And so, despite knowing it would cost him his life, he abandoned his duty as a donkey and in his final moments became an ape once more, saving Caesar. Using this lifeline, the Ape King blew up an oil tank, subsequently taking the entire Alpha Omega base up in flames with it. Mother Nature had one last trick up her sleeve, however. The explosion triggered an avalanche, wiping out all the humans present, whilst Nova and the apes managed to survive by heading to the treetops. With the threat gone and Caesar's hate with it, they could finally journey to their new and safe home. In spite of this, Caesar's injuries proved too much for him. Nonetheless, he was happy. He had achieved his dream. He led the apes into a new world, one that would keep them safe for generations to come. Thus, he sat there, witnessing his son Cornelius happy and free as he felt his life come to a bittersweet end. His clan gathered round, giving their leader the send-off he deserved. Caesar's legacy, however, lived on. Over the next 300 years, his name would be revered as the first great elder ape. Even this many generations later, ape not kill ape and ape together strong still had meaning. Unfortunately, however, some misconstrued such words for their own benefit. Who? Proximus Caesar. You see, the world by this point had changed greatly, yet not at all. The echoes of human civilization still remained, but had since been repurposed. For example, a group of apes known as the Eagle Clan had built their village up within electricity pylons. One member of this clan was an ape named Noah. Much like Caesar, he was smarter than most. a feat which was proven when one day with his friends Anaya and Suna in search of eagle eggs, he reached the highest nest possible. The reason for this journey was not only to symbolize his maturity as an ape, but for a special bonding ceremony that would take place the next day. You see, the eagle clan would use, raise, and bond with eagles, even sing to them. It was a special connection. Things took a terrible turn, however, when they returned to the forces. Noah's blanket had been stolen. When they find it, they learn it smelled like what they referred to as an echo. Things only got worse in the night when Noah heard a noise in one of the tents. It was this echo, aka a human. He was scared. As far as he was concerned, a wild animal had invaded his home. She pushed Noah to one side as she swiftly made a run for it, but in doing so broke his eagle egg. With the bonding ceremony that morning, he had no choice but to set off in search of a new one, or else he'd risk embarrassing his father, who was the master of birds. His journey, however, is cut short by the sound of apes fighting in the distance. He goes to investigate only to find corpses. One surviving ape on his last legs named Oda tells Noah that there are more coming, which is when a gorilla leading a platoon of masked apes on horseback appears. They were Proximus's apes. They smell the scent of the human girl they were after on Noah's blanket, which he dropped and followed his horse back to their village. Realizing the danger he put his people in, Noah races back, but it's too late. As he arrived, his village was on fire and his clan had been rounded up. Meanwhile, his father, in his final moments, set their eagles free before being killed by the general gorilla. Noah was also defeated and left to fall to his death from the top of the pylon, but by sheer luck,
Black Widow for the
he
vibe.
woke up the next morning seeing his entire village ravaged and everyone gone. He buried his father and promised to save him as he set off in search for where his clan had been taken. You see, the reason Proximus took the apes was not only because he believed that the village had the girl, but because he needed them for his own goal. Thus, Noah set off on the tough journey. His father's eagle, son, taunted him as they travelled, which is when Noah fell into an underground hideout. This hideout belonged to an old, elderly orangutan called Raka, the last living member of the Caesar Society, as the rest had all been slaughtered by Proximus. They were a religious group which stayed loyal to Caesar's rule and lived by the laws he set. Thus, Raka taught Noah all about this legend, how human and ape once lived side by side, and how Proximus didn't understand Caesar's legacy as he would twist his words for personal gain. That night as they set up camp,
Actually quite tired. We'll get some real matches in tomorrow.
And got Noah to give her his mother's blanket to keep her warm, explaining that her name was Nova. They were all Nova, as that is what Caesar said. During their time together, Noah started to notice things about this woman. She reacted and acted like apes did. She showed signs of intellect. It was time to part ways with them, however, as they